we're all looking forward to hearing Linda Murphy. I think most people agree there's never been a more effective governor than Frank Keating. And he got a tremendous amount of stuff done with a Democrat Senate and a Democrat House. Here's a man who really knows what he's doing politically. And so when he took office as a governor, newly elected governor, one of the first things he did was go to this lady right here, Linda Murphy, and ask her to be a major part of the Oklahoma Department of Education and his Committee on Education. The Senate Democrats didn't like that, didn't like her appointment, so he made her part of his committee anyway. I'm not sure all the technicalities, but I just know he listened to what Linda Murphy had to say. And he thought what she had to say was as important as what anybody had to say. And she has since done many things in Oklahoma government, had many positions, and she's now the chairman of the OKGOP's education department. It's just a pleasure to have her here today. And Linda, you do have till 1:15, okay, because we're here to reestablish the biblical foundations of Western civilization. And we want you to help lead us. If you would welcome Linda Murphy.
Steve Anderson and I both were in the Keating administration. I was appointed by Governor Keating as Secretary of Education following the 1994 election, where I ran as state superintendent, a candidate from the Republican Party, of course, and I got 49.5% of the vote statewide. I didn't plan to say this, but I'm going to throw it in. That night, we did not get our election total that night in that one statewide race. The totals stopped. They were all ballot box fed in like we feed them now, not the same boxes. I know we've updated, but it was the same basic system. Years later, I won't go into all the details because I wasn't really here to talk about election issues, but it's in the air, isn't it? We've got a problem all across the country, and we've got people working on that, and we need to. But I learned from John Fund with the Wall Street Journal when I went to hear him speak in St. Louis. He was writing a book on election fraud. This was in 96, 98. No, it was probably about 2000. Anyway, I told him the story. He said, if you have an issue with election problems, come and talk to me after the meeting. So I did that. I did not submit my information to his book because I would have had to name names of people much bigger than I was to deal with in this state at that time. But when I told him the story, he said, that can't happen. I said, no, it can't happen. Because if you have the breakdown of a ballot box, not totaling the totals in a precinct or the county or at the state level, it won't affect just one statewide race because they're all on the same ballot. Okay, there's a story for those of you working on election issues that's important to remember. And it goes hand in hand, I think, with what Steve said about Oklahoma being under one-party rule for that many years. And the power of the Democrats was tremendous. When I went into the office with Governor Keating, he appointed me Secretary of Ed in January of 1995. And he appointed me in December, 1 month after the election in November of 94. As I said, I had 49.5% of the vote. I actually had a larger percentage of the vote in my race when we finally got the total. I had a bigger percentage than the governor did because he was in a three-way race. There was an independent, Wes Watkins, in that race. So he actually had less percentage statewide than I did. He had great support. I'm not dismissing that, but he was elected. He appointed me Secretary of Ed. He had heard me speak a number of times. We had agreed on many things about the basics, the academics. Governor Keating went to private Catholic school in Tulsa. He said, if I didn't do my work, the nun would twist my ear. You know, that wasn't going to happen in that setting. He was going to do the work, and it was important. So he believed in discipline. Not twisting ears, but he didn't propose that. But the academics were the focus, and that's what we did a lot of work toward. But of course, we know we have big political, powerful machines out there that rise up against anyone that wants to come in and change the sandbox, the money flow, the power, the position that people have and they're invested in, and they want it to continue that way. We call that the status quo, right? But it's really a big, big number of issues and big, powerful entities. When Governor Keating appointed me Secretary of Ed, I had to go before the Senate Education Committee for a confirmation vote. Prior to that, the House Democrats decided they wanted to grill me and drill me, although they had nothing to do with the confirmation vote. So I did that. We had a hearing and walked out of that room, you know, with lots of reporters there. This was a big, heated battle because Governor Keating had the courage to appoint me when I had almost beaten the incumbent Democrat with a very low budget, statewide grassroots campaign. My grassroots campaign started in a little town in eastern Oklahoma. I wasn't from there. We had just moved there a year prior, and my husband drove to Tulsa from Fort Gibson up to Tulsa to his office. We wanted to live in the country. My dad lived at Tahlequah, about 17 miles away. I'm from western Oklahoma, so I wasn't really even familiar with people in that area. But first thing, I have a one-year-old at home. I had time that I substitute taught in the school. I'm a certified teacher, certified 30 years by the State Department of Ed, which happened to have gotten lost during the last election, 2018, when I ran. My certification, a reporter told me, shows you were only certified 3 years. I said, no, 30. You know, I did that. And I've got the records. But at any rate, that's just part of the politics, right? So I was in Fort Gibson, and as a parent and as a teacher, I was asked to be on a committee. And at first, the first committee I went on, the principal wanted to get rid of grades. Totally, get rid of grades. And I didn't agree with that, and I had reasons why, although I truly believe in giving children time to develop, and sometimes there are things we shouldn't be grading, and now it's gotten extreme the other way, unfortunately. But that's not where we were then. And so this was extreme. I mean, sometimes this pendulum swings way, way over here, and then it goes way, way over there. So at that time, that's where we were. That principal had a little objection when I was recommended later by the PTO president to be the person to rewrite the school plan on a committee with a group of people that were on there. But I was the parent representative, and I was a teacher, but I wasn't teaching in that system. So I went to the meetings, and the first thing the superintendent told us, was that he was going to make radical changes in our school. And he used that word, radical. Well, being a conservative, and I didn't even call myself that or anything politically at that time. I was, you know, registered to vote. I voted, but I wasn't a political activist of any type. But I did have conservative Christian values. I just hadn't really thought about that. I was just me, you know. I was who I was. And that principal said, she's very controversial, isn't she? Well, when the parent came by, she was appalled because she knew I wasn't controversial. I was her friend and neighbor. Our kids were in soccer together. Her husband was on the school board. In fact, that is Tom and Debbie Gann that I'm talking about. They were our neighbors in Fort Gibson. He's a state representative now, Tom Gann. But he was on the school board, and so we've had some learning experiences over the years. But as a parent, I was put on this school board, or this board, and a school board member, Tom, was on there as well. And then there were other educators, a couple of administrators. This radical plan, I asked for information. I asked the principal, who had appointed me in spite of her thinking I was, whatever I just said she said, extreme, radical, no, she didn't say radical, controversial, yeah, controversial. I asked her for information. I said, the superintendent, Garrison, said we're going to make some radical changes. Do you know anything about what he has in mind? She said, yes, we've had some meetings. We've had some meetings at the state senate, and we've had some other meetings, and I'll give you that file. So she gave it to me. I went home and started reading, and I found, this was in 1992 in the fall, I found that the man who was doing the meetings, the training in Oklahoma, who was the expert from the Federal Department of Education Grant Laboratory, the Far West Laboratory, coined the term outcomes-based education. Dr. William Spady was a sociologist, not an educator, and he said that the results of OBE, this program, are not yet certain. That was 1 year before we're implementing it statewide, and we were a pilot school. So without going into a whole lot of details, which we don't have time for, it's all very interesting as it unfolds. These are the things that we're dealing with in our State Department of Ed and from the federal level. Things that are not always a good idea in the first place. They get implemented into law, and then we have to find out what they really are. And as a parent, I ended up writing a chapter in this book. A man from Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, editor, asked if I would write a chapter. It's called Not With My Child, You Don't. And that's because I was one of those parent activists. Yes, I was a teacher, I was certified, but I spoke at meetings. I spoke at a town hall meeting because I was asked to. I'd done the research on the program, and a man who was a Democrat Pacific Railroad Union negotiator, but he was a parent in the community, didn't like this program either. He was beginning to see it in his children's curriculum. And he came and said, would you, he called me actually, he came to the meeting first and then he called me and he said, would you come and do a town hall meeting? So that's my beginning of a town hall meeting, was in Fort Gibson. I learned years later, in fact not too long ago, that the registration in Fort Gibson when we lived there was 80% Democrats. And I ended up running as a Republican statewide candidate from 20% Republican representation in that county, which, you know, you can imagine some of the things we dealt with. And some of them were very personal against my children from union leaders, and I'm not saying everybody in the union would do that, but this person did. Stopped things that my children were participating in, I mean, at school. It was a very cruel situation, really, for kids to go through. We had Wilma Mankiller come and present at a meeting at the school, an auditorium presentation for all the students on multiculturalism. Well, I didn't think anything of it, nor did I wasn't concerned a bit. But later in the week, my first grader came home and said, Mom, I don't want to be a snake. I don't want to be a snake. And I said, you don't want to be a snake? What are you talking about? I don't want to be a snake, Mama. Everybody else was a snake, but I don't want to be one. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, they got down in the floor and they were snakes. Well, as he described it, it was a snake dancer who came and performed in the first grade classroom with a breechcloth only, an official, authentic snake dancer. And the children participated as snakes. So this was part of the multicultural program that was rolling out. It was extreme, yeah, it was radical, I later found that I had a videotape of Wilma Mankiller being interviewed by C-SPAN when Governor Walters had the National Governors Association meeting in Tulsa. And Wilma was there, you know, Democrat along with Governor Walters and Bill Clinton from Arkansas, right across the line from Tulsa there, where he was at the time, governor of Arkansas. And Wilma talked about the multiculturalism focus that the UN had for the programs they were rolling out in schools. Well, when I had recorded that, I had no clue that was going to touch me or what that might be. But that was a problem in a local district. I wrote a note to the teacher, and I was so nice because, oh, I was so politically correct that it hurts to think about it now. I said, I would prefer, Mrs. H., I would prefer that Clayton observe, oh, oops, I said my son's name, observe but not participate. Observe but not participate. I didn't want to pull him out, sit him in the hall, you know, send him home and everybody, well, what's wrong with him? So he was in there, but he didn't have to be a snake. And so when he came home, I said, did you give the note to your teacher? Yes. He said, yes. I said, what did she say? He said, well, she started crying. And she went out in the hall and called the principal, and they were both upset, Mom. I thought, oh boy. So anyway, I smoothed that over the best I could, that I wasn't dictating what other people should do, that this is what I believe. Well, that came up in the campaign when I ran for state superintendent. It didn't really come out to the surface, but when Governor Keating appointed me Secretary of Education, Wilma Mankiller decided to have a press conference and denounce me as the appointed Secretary of Ed on behalf of the 5 civilized tribes, because I wouldn't allow my child to participate in Indian education activities. Well, that sounds pretty bad if you don't know what it is. And I called a friend when he came home and told me, when my son told me this, I called a friend who was 100% and still is 100% Choctaw, and I said, Phyllis, what do you think about the snake dance? You know, this is what he has in class. She said, I wouldn't allow my children to do that. She said, that's a religious ceremony. She was a Christian, Choctaw, 100%. You know, it's not about race. It's about parents' rights, isn't it? It's about parents' rights. And I think when we heard this last week, we all know, as Reed mentioned, the National School Board Association letter, we're going to talk about that. But even before that letter was out there and known, the Secretary of Education, Cardona, under President Biden, said to the Senate Education Committee, Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee, on the same day, 9/30, just about a week ago, that parents should not be the primary stakeholders in their children's education. Parents should not be. Okay, that's enough right there. Then we get the letter out and we can all read it. If you haven't read it, I'll send it to you. If you don't find it, you can get my email afterward and I'll send you that. It's a 6-page letter. And in the letter, I noticed quickly, it's very cleverly worded for legal purposes. First of all, it's not legal because the federal government has no legal authority in education. And yet, when schools accept some money, they've got strings with it that they're going to have to comply. But do you know that's been about 6%, 5%, maybe 10% at the most, traditionally? Now we've got all this COVID money coming through the Federal Department of Ed to schools. We've got another deal there, so that's another can of worms. But I noticed in this letter, which says that the National School Board Association believes immediate assistance is required to protect our students, school board members, and educators who are susceptible to acts of violence affecting interstate commerce. Really? How does that happen? They're shutting down the town, there can be no trade, and they're in front of the gas station and people can't get, what is that about? That is a legal statement and it's in this letter 3 times. So when I spoke to Ryan Walters about it, the morning after I posted it on Facebook on 9/30, when I saw it, and we talked the next day, I said, let's take note that that clause is in there 3 times. So there's further action coming. Well, 4 days later, we get the National School Board Association's response from Merrick Garland, the Attorney General under Biden. And you know that Obama tried to get him confirmed, and he could not be confirmed because of his radical views, and yet he's there now. He's the Attorney General. And he sent a memorandum on October the 4th to the Director of the FBI, to the Director Executive Office for U.S. Attorneys, Assistant Attorney General, Criminal Division, U.S. Attorneys. And he said it's regarding partnerships among federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial law enforcement to address threats against school administrators, board members, students, and staff, or teachers and staff. Now, they're calling it domestic terrorism in the letter. Domestic terrorist. Fortunately, we have some state senators who wrote a letter to the State School Board Association Executive Director, Sean Hine. Sean Hine, I'm sure, is a pretty nice guy. I know a lot of people that know him. He's from Enid. He was the superintendent there. But when you're in the head of one of these bureaucracies, and I say that knowing that I disagree with him politically, he supported Common Core, I opposed it. He didn't like that. I did meetings in Enid he wasn't happy about, so he's not like my friend. But I'm saying, this is what happens with these problems. People know people and they're nice and they know them in a certain setting, but we've got to look at the policy, and regardless of how we might think they're nice or their family or whatever, we've got to look at how that is affecting the people in our state. And that's what we have to look at. So Sean Hine, I put his picture along with the statement that the people of Oklahoma do not support federal law enforcement coming into our communities, to our schools. We do not support that. And the State School Board Association needs to make a statement against it, because this letter says we represent, on behalf of our state associations and more than 90,000 school board members. Are you kidding? Did they survey the school board members in the state of Oklahoma and get their approval to do this? Heck no, they sure didn't. And I don't know if Sean Hine was asked. If he was, he's in bigger trouble. But he's in trouble anyway, because he's delayed now all these days and hasn't said a word that I'm aware of, unless he said it since 8 this morning when I looked. But what I did find when I went to the State School Board Association website was a cancellation of a workshop for equity training for school board members, presented by the National School Board Association. They canceled it. It was going to be October 22nd. So let's give ourselves a hand. As Reed and everyone else has said, this is about patriots. This is about a conservative state of people waking up, standing up, and not allowing this kind of federal overreach in our system, in our lives, not our system, our lives, our children. The minds of our children are affected by what they are told, what they hear repeatedly. I did some investigation on Tulsa Public Schools in a lot of areas, because that's where a lot of our biggest problems are. And over the years, I've written articles that are in the Oklahoma Constitution newspaper. You can go there. I've got a website with other articles, so I'm not going to go into all the details. If you want to know more, I can send you an article. But in Tulsa Public Schools, for example, there's a program called Amplify. A teacher called me and said, Linda, I can't teach this. This was about 4 years ago. I cannot teach this. I'm a Christian. I'm a conservative. I will not teach this to my students. She said, would you go online and look at what my principal says I have to teach this year? So she gave me her passkeys. I went in, looked at it, started reading. It's Amplify, which all of their material says they are Common Core. They are English language arts classes for 1st through 8th grade is what I looked at. And in the 1st grade even, 3, and this is English language arts, so you have to take it. It's their reading program, it's online. And it's 3 religions, Jews, Muslims, and Christians, all believe in one God. That's what they're taught. We know that monotheism, one, that they believe, each religion believes there is one God. That is true. But how does a 1st grader cognitively, mentally dissect, comprehend what that means? They're going to think they all believe in God, you know, especially our Christian kids that have just heard about God, you know, and they're going to believe. And I'm just saying that's predominantly our culture in this state. So what does that do? That is, as you said, blasphemy to a Christian. We do not want our children taught this. She said, I have a Muslim leader, and I don't remember which one. I think it was Mohammed, but I don't remember. But she said, I'm supposed to put this poster up in my 4th grade classroom. Okay, that's Tulsa. Deborah Gist, who is the superintendent, has flown the gay pride flag at the administration building, marched in the gay pride parade in Tulsa. They have called teachers out for the color of their skin in teacher training. In Tulsa, we have a 30-year in the classroom, 30-year experienced Tulsa classroom teacher on our state board, not school board, our state board for the Oklahoma GOP. We have 2 from each congressional district, and Tina from Tulsa has been there and been through this training, and as a Christian, she said, I am so glad to be out of there, and I have lots of friends that are ready to leave. So it's driving out people that are doing a good job. Oklahoma City Public Schools don't escape a lot of this insulting and dangerous type of social engineering coming through. The superintendent in Oklahoma City also marched in the Gay Pride Parade in Oklahoma City. I wrote an article about this because David Holt, Mr. Urbanic, David Holt praised the people receiving the gay awards, the Gay Pride Awards in Oklahoma City. There was an article in the Gazette, and I took their quotes right out of it. They praised and awarded. They had different colors of the rainbow. Each color was an award that they gave to a person. One of them went to the county health department sex education person that went out to the schools, and this is because they promote the lifestyle in the sex education program. They believe it's discriminatory not to. So comprehensive sex ed has been a battleground for a long time, as you know. And the thing about it is parents need to know. If their child is in a classroom that is going to be taught something, even if it's taught to the whole class, there should be an opt-in, not an opt-out. There should not be an opt-out later after you found out about it and didn't know it was going to happen. Those things need to be stopped. People that love public ed, that want to keep a public ed system, that want public ed where they are, if they push this on the public, they're driving the public out of these schools where they're doing this, okay? And they're not all doing it. We've got 550 schools, and we've got all kinds of problems. We've got financial problems, we've got curriculum problems. Some of them are local issues, but some of them are coming from the state, okay? Another one, OU Medical Center, one of the doctors from OU Medical Center was honored and awarded one of the colors of the rainbow for her work in sex change with children. And it was in the Gazette, so I quoted what they said. And she said that she loved to work with these children when they didn't have the support of their families. And they start with the age of 10. That's OU Medical Center right here. So we've got state agencies, we've got the county health department. Another thing that came up, Oklahoma, and again, this was not coming from the state as a mandate, wasn't coming from the State Department of Ed. We've got problems there, so we don't have time to talk about but just a couple of things here today, but I'm just giving you a taste of what we're going to put together in this committee that we can work with whoever is elected to the next, to the state superintendent's office. Whoever wins that race, we will work with that person and provide them documentation of these things going on in schools and have part of it traced down. More of it will have to be investigated, as Steve and Bob well know, with what they're looking at. Okay, on the state level, the CDC and the county health department worked with a crisis pregnancy center and provided comprehensive sex ed in a public school in northeastern Oklahoma. And the person that blew the whistle on it was a 12-year-old who came home to her mom, who was a teacher in that school. And when I talked to her, she said, we have never spoken against our school, but we are totally distraught. They're Christian conservative people, and her 12-year-old daughter was in a class with boys and girls mixed, learning about 5 kinds of sex. 5 kinds. Now we can let our minds imagine, we probably shouldn't. We probably need to just drop that, but it was everything you can imagine about sex. You know, did they tell them all about it? No, of course not. But to even just introduce the thought of 5 kinds of sex, is that the way you want your daughter or your son to think of sex? Their first thoughts, maybe, of sex when they really think about it? No, you don't want that. You know, God created us and gave us sex for a purpose and for pleasure as well, yes, but not this perversion that goes into the mind of a child that gets that kind of a program. And sadly, the parents were really put in the heat, and the Crisis Pregnancy Center, the Christian Crisis Pregnancy Center, had been convinced by the CDC that they were saving lives. Because if all these children are out there having sex without protection and they don't understand sex, then we are not teaching them what they need to know. And they stood by that. That just kind of blows us away, doesn't it? But that's the kind of thing that we find. And then from the state, Superintendent Joy Hoffmeister sent out a directive about 1.5 years ago that went out to all the schools, it went to superintendents, it went to counselors, and it was regarding the need, the requirement is the way it was really worded as a directive, to establish clubs for LGBTQ students. And at the bottom of the directive, they were to praise the teachers that were supportive of these students. There was a whole list of things they were to do. At the bottom, they listed Title IX and some other legalese, which really had nothing to do with that issue. And when schools got it, many of them were concerned that they were going to be in trouble with their accreditation if they didn't comply with what looked like legally they had to do. They didn't have to do that legally. And so we had some state representatives that stood up against that and got that exposed. And finally, the State Department of Ed admitted Sandy Garrett. Really, so many things are similar, it's hard to draw that line. But Joy Hoffmeister, a Republican, had sent this out through one of her divisions. So we have many things to look at on our committee. We have 10 people, 2 from each congressional district. They are education background people. They have years of experience total, and they're all conservative Republicans. So I think we're going to be able to shine some light. I talked with Julie Daniels, Senator from Bartlesville, yesterday, and she said, I'm going to be on at 4 in the morning, and she was this morning. Early, I put it on Facebook, her interview with Fox Friends First, which is maybe 5 o'clock their time, but 4 o'clock her time, talking about the letter that our state senators wrote, asking Sean Hine to denounce that or to distance from that. That is not that National School Board Association letter. You all know this probably, but just to say real quick and ending, our local school boards pay dues to the State School Board Association. That is not their personal money. That is taxpayer dollars that gets to them through the budget. You know, it comes out of their school budget. In the early 90s, when we fought with this OBE issue and we had people all over the state standing up like we're seeing now, we had a school board in Moore that pulled out of the State School Board Association. They quit paying their dues because they were being indoctrinated. So, thank you, Reed, for what you're doing with school boards, and Janet, the work you've done there with the school boards. We all know that's very important, and they probably have as much or more power than the OEA. We have an alternative to OEA, Professional Oklahoma Educators, which is not a union. They do not have the radical agenda that the NEA OEA does. And as teachers wake up, more of them are looking at that. They have about 9,000 members right now. I want to end with one statement here from a friend who is a child psychologist in Utah. He fought the Common Core battle with us. He saw what it was doing. in Utah where they went full blast with the model that rolled out at the national level. And he says, and I agree totally, parents are and should always be the resident experts of their own children. That's it. Thank you.